Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of RPG Radio. My name is Winback, and on today's build guide I'm taking you through a Bleed Barbarian in Diablo 4. That's right, blood for the blood god, and we'll worry about the skulls later because they take up way too much inventory space. So I'm sure Khorne, being the understanding chaos god that he is, will forgive us because he's just known for that supreme level of patience, right? Anyway, with that said, in this video I am going to tell you how I leveled up my Bleeding Barbarian, all the skills that we're using, the best aspects to find while you are going from level 1 to 50, and then after you hit that mark, the easier ways to get leveled up. Now, being that this is an early game leveling guide for the Bleed Explosion Barbarian, there's not going to be any Paragon stuff. Even though we are over level 50, the Paragon board is only that first board, and I've only been using easy nodes. So there's not much going on there, but rest assured, next video we'll have the Paragon board. This one's going to be all about aspects that you can get from dungeons, skills, and what points you will need to put into them, the passives that you'll need as well, and every little nook and cranny in between. So forget everything else that you were doing today. Put those dishes down, sit in that chair, eat your food if you have to, but you better be focused because there is so many things to do in order to properly worship the Chaos God Khorne, the master of blood, violence, skulls, and murder, while simultaneously having the time of your life playing a barbarian, because who else better? Maybe the necromancer, but don't mention that to anybody else, okay? This is a barbarian channel. We don't play those other classes. Now, in order to give you the best possible information for this guide, I'm going to tell you how this build works first, and then you can decide if you want to play it, if you want to build it yourself. At that point, you'll have all of the information for the aspects, where to farm them, what points go into what abilities, and the best possible way to make this work in the late game. So, the general idea for the Bleeding Barbarian Berserker of your dream is going to require that you fill up half of your action bar with bleeding skills. And what I mean by that is that you are going to have Flay as your basic skill, Rend as your core skill, and Rupture as your weapon mastery skill, also functioning as a semi-ultimate and execution device. So with those three things in tow, you'll be able to do enough bleeding damage leading up to the selection of Rallying Cry, Iron Maelstrom, and Leap. All of these things really have to go together. I tried my best to make Charge usable, but Leap is giving us more Fury generation. I also didn't want to get rid of Iron Maelstrom, so there are a lot of other abilities that just get factored out because they are either taking Fury from Rend, they are forcing us not to use Iron Maelstrom, or they are taking away the Unstoppable that we're getting from Rallying Cry. With that being said though, what this build is really focused on is alternating between your left and your right clicks through Flay and Rend to reduce the cooldown of Iron Maelstrom, and then ultimately using your Rupture to execute big elite enemies with big health bars, as they are about 30% to 20% health in bleeding damage. If you're not familiar with what Rupture does, Rupture is going to have the barbarian skewer the enemy, and as they pull the sword out, the bleeding damage that is currently stacked up on whatever enemy that you are attacking is done to them all at once. With the aspects that we've got, we do have 2 charges of weapon mastery skills, so that means we get to do a lot of rupturing at the exact right moment. But like I mentioned, Iron Maelstrom has a mechanic in that every time that you change weapons and deal direct damage, you will reduce the cooldown of that ultimate by 1 second, and it very recently got a buff to reduce its overall cooldown from 60 seconds to 45 seconds. I was going to incorporate Iron Maelstrom anyway, but that is a huge buff, making it even better for us. That being said, clicking between right and left is very easy because this build does have some decent attack speed into it. You'll also use your leap to jump into big groups of enemies to get a big fury chunk as well to help you, again, alternate between your right and left clicks. But that counts as a weapon change as well because you're going to fix your mace, your two-handed bludgeoning weapon, to your leap. Your flay is going to be your dual-wielding weapons. Your rend is going to be your two-handed slashing weapons, and rupture is also going to be your two-handed slashing weapon. So your big two-handed slasher should be a sword because there is a unique that we are playing for later on in the game that is going to buff rupture even further into the stratosphere. And that being said, the sword on your the sword in your kit gives you just innately more critical strike damage. So having a two-handed sword means your critical strike damage goes up, and the reason that you'll want critical strike damage is for the Barbarian's unique passive at the end, which is going to feed off of that damage to do even more bleeding damage, which is going to give you even bigger payoffs with rupture. So you can kind of figure out how the mouth works all together there, but that's the general function of the build. Leap is your big fury generator and mobility tool. Iron Maelstrom is your huge damage AoE room clearing ultimate that is easy to reduce the cooldown on. Rallying Cry is your damage buff, and Unstoppable button, which is incredibly useful on a decent enough cooldown with a long enough duration to be just absolutely what we need. Rupture is your big time execute button. Flay is your basic attack, fury generator, and bleed builder, and then Rend is your core bleed builder, which does much more damage, spends that fury, and gives you an alternate button to go through with Flay. Sound easy enough? I know it's a lot, so pay attention. I'm going to show you how to build it all from here. Now, to kick things off, I'm going to tell you the aspects that are going to be the most useful for leveling this build up from 1 to 50 and where you can find them. Each of these aspects is obtainable through a dungeon, and they play some part in keeping the build healthy, helping it do damage, or some form of utility to clear mobs faster and get on to the next level. So your first aspect is the Iron Blood aspect, which can be found in the Forgotten Ruins in Kyrgyzstan. If this is your first playthrough on a character in Diablo 4 period, things might be a little bit different for you, but if this is going to be a seasonal character, or if you are picking up a number 2 on the Eternal Realm, should be pretty easy. You're going to be unlocking the map anyway. You can go basically wherever you want to, so this is how you're going to function in picking up these aspects. But that being said, Iron Blood is going to do one thing for you, and that is reduction in damage that you take per bleeding target. So the early one that you get is 2% per bleeding target up to a 10% maximum, but given the way that Iron Maelstrom works and Rend work, they're both big AoE abilities, so you can get that stacked up real quick, and you'll have another 10% damage reduction on top of your innate damage reduction and whatever other kind of damage reduction that you're building, being a big tanky barbarian. So damage reduction is good, don't sleep on that, and this is a very easy one to get early on. Don't skip it. Next is the Slaking aspect. This gives you a lucky hit on Rend with a 30% chance to gain 20 Fury when Rend deals direct damage to at least one bleeding enemy. Rend actually has this type of functionality, but we're not using it in this build, but you can get Fury while using Rend depending on how many enemies that you hit. This is more useful for the build because it's passive. We don't have to spend any skill points on it. It doesn't reduce our damage. It's just going to help the infinite loop of going from Flay to Rend and making sure that you have enough Fury for Rend to continue to pop off. So that being said, remember these aspects are not in any particular order. you're going to probably want to get them all hammered out before, you know, level 30 or so. At level 30, you should have a good deal of your build and your gear ready to deal damage, enough to push through, you know, big dungeons, big enemies, that sort of stuff. But as far as how you pick these up, where you pick these up, I wouldn't worry too much about them. You could probably pick the damage ones up first and come in for these utility and defensive options later, but that's just a recommendation. Pick them up however you see fit. Rapid is the next aspect. You're going to get that in buried halls and the dry steppes, and this gives you attack speed on your basic skills. Our basic skill is Flay, and seeing as how there are very few points in this ability as a base, it has a lot of functionality as a fury generator, so you want to be able to swing it quick. That makes Rapid really important for switching from your Flay to your Rend. But more importantly, as you get into tier 3 and 4, Rapid comes with very, very high attack speed for Flay. So getting it early on, getting you used to having big speed on Flay and swapping back and forth between the two is pretty important for the build. Just get into the muscle memory, the habit of doing it, get the Rapid, get going fast. It's Sonic in a sword. You're welcome. Aspect of the Expectant is on deck, and this is going to let you increase the damage of your Rend when you attack with a basic skill, which is Flay. So basically, you'll build up an extra 30% damage on your Rend if you have to do nothing but Flay continuously. This one may or may not make it to the late game build for this Barbarian, but as it is right now, the attack speed on Flay and building up that 30% isn't extremely difficult if you're holding on to your Iron Maelstrom for a little bit longer for the right situation. So if you just want to go rip a couple Flays onto a single big health bad guy to get a bigger Rend, that is what this aspect is for. The aspect of Anemia is going to give you the ability to stun enemies that are bleeding after you deal direct damage to them. Direct damage is just damage that isn't damage over time, so all of your abilities do this. None of them cause just pure bleeding damage. Even Flay and Rend do some direct damage when they connect with a hit. That being said, all of this stuff dealing damage to bleeding enemies to stun them is incredibly helpful, and this percentage is going to go up yet again as the game progresses, so it's very, very good for stunning enemies, keeping things CC'd, even though our kit, apart from Iron Maelstrom, doesn't have any hard CC with an ability built in. If you really want to, you can wait until you pick up your Barbarian passive called Gushing Wounds at the very end of the talent tree to pick up Earthstriker's aspect. This one is going to give you the ability to guarantee an overpower after 10 weapon swaps, so the functionality is when Gushing Wounds overpowers, it explodes in an AoE for more damage. But prior to that, there isn't a whole lot of overpower going on in this build. Obviously, it's always going to be there, it's always going to be helpful, but I don't think it's necessarily something that you have to build all of your Barbarian around, at least while you're leveling. 1 to 50, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Disobedience is another very, very, very strong defensive option, and while it's going to be good in the early game, you're going to want it for late game more specifically, because the damage reduction that it gets in tier 3 and 4 is gross. It is very, very high compared to this one, but basically Disobedience is just giving you armor, and you're stacking that up for all the damage that you're doing. And considering that we're dealing lots of damage all the time in a consistent pattern rather than a burst pattern, you can get that armor built up relatively easily, especially if you rip out an Iron Maelstrom, because that is rooms worth of damage in an AoE, and all of that damage is going to be bleeding damage as well, because that second swing of Iron Maelstrom comes with a bleeding modifier. So basically, you can rip an Iron Maelstrom, hit everything in the room, all of it's bleeding, all of it's been hit a ton of times, so you can stack up that big armor really quick and keep it rolling. It is incredibly good for how it works just based off that one ability, not even to mention the rest of the kit, which is also AoE, also damage over time, also lots of ticking of damage. You can see what I'm talking about. Aspect of Might is yet another defensive ability. Super easy, very, very good for the kit though. Basic skills are going to give you a damage reduction, considering that we already have super attack speed oriented basic skills, making them give us more damage reduction in the face of later game elites and bigger, angrier bosses. You can see how stacking all of that stuff is just going to be super helpful for keeping us alive when we just want to stand in big clumps of enemies and hit them. I didn't mention it yet, but as a kind of side project for this build, we're also looking at thorns, and those aspects, that gear is going to be more important later in the game. But just remember, we've got thorns going on in the background too. Those are going to be building up extra special on the next video for this build, and it is going to be fantastic. So remember, that's there. Not super important for the early game leveling, but thorns is good. Now, we went a little bit out of order. I know we did the aspects first instead of doing the abilities first, but since I told you how the abilities function in the early part of the video, if you really want to know everything else about the abilities, how they are working together, that's what this part of the video is going to be for. So I'll tell you which points to put into what, how many you'll need, and basically the idea on how each ability works with the rest. So that being said, let's start with the easiest thing that we can do. When you are level 1, you are going to pick up Flay. Flay is easily enough a big swinging cleave that you'll do with your two-handed weapons. Remember to have it equipped to your two-handers so you can get maximum attack speed out of it. This is just going to generate fury and apply a smaller bleed to the enemies that you attack. You're also going to want to take the single point into Enhanced Flay and the next point into Battle Flay, because the modifiers for Flay are going to start off giving you a baseline opportunity to make enemies vulnerable with just your basic attack. You've got a 15% chance because we're using the dual wielding weapons. If we were using a two-handed slashing weapon, that goes up to 30%, but I am going to focus on those dual wielders because the attack speed is more important to me than the attack speed and the weapon swapping is more important to me than the increase in vulnerability chance. So with the amount of times that we attack, the chance really, there shouldn't be a whole lot of issue there. That being said, that's just Enhanced Flay. You're also going to take Battle Flay. When Flay deals direct damage to an enemy, they are going to take an additional 10% increased bleeding damage over the or from you for the next 3 seconds. So when you hit them with a Flay, all of your bleeding damage done in the next 3 seconds is going to increase by 10%. So if you hit them with a Rend, after hitting them with a Flay, if that Rend is doing 1,000 damage, it's now going to be doing 1,100 damage. I don't think those are actual numbers, but you get the idea. So Battle Flay increases our bleeding damage, and we do deal a lot of bleeding damage. Seeing as how you're going to be using Flay so very often, it's just a no-brainer to take this. The other option is getting Thorns and damage reduction for Flay, but I'll take the damage. Remember that you're only putting a single point into Flay and obviously a single point into each of its modifiers, but that will get you down to the next tier of ability, which is the core skill tier, and that is where you'll start to pick up Rend. Rend is the first ability that you're going to want to put all 5 points into, because we want to get a lot of damage out of Rend while swapping back and forth between Flay. Rend is going to deal more than double the damage of your flay. So that being said, the bleed is over 5 seconds, just like flay. The enhanced rend, however, is going to deal damage, no, not deal damage, is going to extend the duration of vulnerability on enemies by 2 seconds. So with that built-in chance of vulnerability with flay, now we have the ability to increase that duration with rend, because they're just going to be flip-flopping between each other all the time. Violent rend is the next thing that you'll want. That means that rend is going to deal 12% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. So yet again, there's the synergy between flay and rend coming to the forefront. That other thing that I mentioned about rend getting fury back, that's furious rend, and you're going to get 4 fury per enemy hit up to a maximum of 20. But I don't take that because we get plenty of fury from leap and flay and rallying cry. There's really no reason to quadruple down on fury generation at this point. Moving further down the line to the next tier of abilities, we have got Rallying Cry. Rallying Cry is pretty important for this build because it offers you an unstoppable for a very long period of time, but more than that, resource generation is activated as soon as you shout, and you're going to get movement speed when you use this shout as well. So basically, you push the button, 25-second cooldown, you get movement speed by 30% and resource gen for 40% for 6 seconds. That also extends to allies if you're playing in a party. But once you get enhanced Rallying Cry, that means that you are going to go completely unstoppable while Rallying Cry is active. That is a huge window of time to be unstoppable, and it'll make a lot of sense when you start getting into rooms full of frost enchanted enemies or spiders or, you know, the stunning snake monster demon dudes. It's just incredibly invaluable for as long as it lasts. And then after that, you're going to pick up Tactical Rallying Cry, which lets you generate 20 fury, and you get an additional 28% resource gen. So you go from 40% to 60% resource generation, and you get 20 fury just for pushing the button. That means all of the stuff that you are getting from for your fury generation is made infinitely better by Rallying Cry. So hit this button often, especially if you're going into a room full of elites or just big rooms in general, and watch how good it is when it comes to filling up that fury bar. I mean, you can see it if you're watching the video, which I hope you are. The fury bar goes down and up like crazy, but it does, while Rallying Cry is active, it does stay relatively high, even though we're ripping a rend, you know, every other auto attack basically. Don't forget, there is a passive on this tier that you'll need later on in the game, but that's Outburst, and that's going to give you thorns as well as additional thorns for maximum life, bonus maximum life that you have. So more thorns is a good thing. Put all 3 points into that, and then you're going to put 1 point into Tough as Nails, which is going to increase your thorns by a percentage, and enemies are going to take your thorns as bleeding damage as well. If I didn't mention it, on Rallying Cry, you only need 1 point there, 1 point into Enhanced and Tactical as well. So unless I'm telling you put all your points here or a specific number of points, remember it's probably 1. Next up is going to be our Brawling skill tier, and there are a couple different ones to take. Mainly, your activatable ability is going to be Leap, and you only need 1 point into Leap, 1 point into Enhanced Leap, which really isn't super helpful for anything other than giving you the ability to take Power Leap. So Power Leap gives you 40 Fury if you land on an enemy with Leap, whereas Enhanced Leap just reduces the cooldown by 4 seconds if you jump onto nothing. This seems kind of like a dev mistake. I don't necessarily think that that's good, because you're not going to be, I mean, you're probably using Leap to travel around in dungeons, but even then 4 seconds isn't really a big enough cooldown for that to mean anything And you're definitely not going to be using it in the overworld because you've got your horse, and as clunky as that is, you're still going to be faster than you would be leaping around, so I don't know. Enhanced leap sucks, but power leap is incredible, so it's just worth taking the one terrible talent for the one incredible talent. But that being said, it's only 1 point into leap. Don't worry about taking anything else there because leap isn't going to be dealing a lot of extra damage in this build like it does in the Deathblow build. The other passive that you're going to want is swiftness. Make sure to take 3 points into that for the 12% increased movement speed. And then booming voice. Take all 3 points into booming voice to ridiculously increase the duration of your rallying cry. This is a super good passive, but you don't need any of the modifiers beyond that. Moving down to the weapon mastery tier, this is where we're going to pick up Rupture, which is probably the second most fun ability on this build. And then that is just going to have you, like I said earlier, stab the sword in, pull it out, and deal all of the bleeding damage that the enemy was suffering from to them in an instant. The sword stab in isn't a whole lot of damage, but it does deal damage, and I mean really this is just an execute button. Remember, there's not an aspect that you can find to do this, but the gear that provides you with a second weapon mastery charge you want to keep for as long as possible, because having 2 ruptures is much better than having 1. The enhanced rupture is going to let your rupture do a big AoE bleeding explosion, and that's going to deal bleeding damage to everything in a big circle around your target that is being ruptured. Then you're going to take Warrior's Rupture after that for increased attack speed after you have popped your Rupture, meaning that Flay and Cleave are going to be going ham. Getting close to the end, so Iron Maelstrom is our final ultimate ability on the bar. It's easy to see, it's just going to slam down in a huge AoE, stunning. Your second swipe is going to cause bleeding to everybody, and the third swipe is just going to deal extra damage. Prime Maelstrom is going to increase the crit chance and the crit damage, and then Supreme Iron Maelstrom is going to give you the cooldown reduction that you're getting for swapping weapons. It's a really short cooldown, so swapping a lot means that you can have Iron Maelstrom going almost all the time. And then finally, your passive, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, is called Gushing Wounds. When you are causing an enemy to bleed, you have a chance equal to your critical strike chance to increase that bleed by double. Overpowering a bleeding enemy creates an explosion that inflicts bleeding damage over 5 seconds as well. That probably sounds a little bit goofy when I'm saying it, but you can see when all of the blood explosions are happening in this video how cool it is. But that is it for me. That is it for the Bleeding Barbarian early game. Let me know what you think, and I'll be back to finish this off next time. Peace out, everybody.